when I started the company to develop games, it was called Challenge. And the idea was, if you thought an Infocom game was hard, wait until you played a challenge game. And the first thing we decided to do was build an engine, but then Dave said, why build an engine when you can license one? Why don't you call up Infocom and see if you can license their engine? Which I thought was nuts, because they were, the biggest game company going out there. And but he said to try, so I did, and we started talking about licenses. And eventually, they said, well, let's forget licensing. Why don't you write games for us? And so that's how I became Infocom's first outside developer, their only remote implementer. I had always been a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and as I started to work on the game, one of the things that I thought a game should be is interesting people in interesting places doing interesting things. And I thought, who is more interesting than Sherlock Holmes? And not only is he interesting, but he brings with him a whole cast of characters like Dr. Watson and Inspector Lestrade and Professor Moriarty and the Baker Street Irregulars. Plus, it was in the public domain. So I thought, here's something that is a well-known genre, a well-known story setting, a place where I didn't have to do a lot of work on my own to create new characters, new settings, and that sort of thing. And so I was pretty comfortable setting the game in that space. The player's goal, of course, is to solve the mystery. Professor Moriarty has stolen the crown jewels and is trying to lure Sherlock Holmes into a trap. And you play Dr. Watson, who is trying to help Sherlock solve this problem, which I thought was a little more interesting than playing Sherlock yourself, because if you play Sherlock, you don't actually get to see him be brilliant. And so the idea was to have Watson be the player, and so he could actually see Holmes in action. In terms of what I'm happiest about the way the game turned out, I think we really did capture the atmosphere that we were going for. The idea of that Victorian London, being true to the spirit of Holmes, being also historically and geographically accurate. I got maps of the streets from that time, and the people at Infocom were also sort of fanatically detail-oriented in the same way I was. We actually called up the London Times and got permission to reproduce stories from the day that the game action takes place, which was just prior to Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. In terms of mistakes that I made when we started Sherlock, certainly the biggest one was scope. I thought that I could make 3 of these games in a year, and in fact I built a business plan around that, which was not a good idea. And in fact, it turned out that it took me more than a year to write just one of those games. So certainly scope was the first problem. And the second thing was sort of typical of young designers. I made the game very hard, and in particular, I made the game hard at the beginning. So probably the most difficult puzzle in Sherlock is the first puzzle that you face, which is going to Westminster Abbey and finding the right tombs to make some rubbings on, and then taking the sheets that you've done the rubbings into a room where there are a bunch of candles, where there's some heat, and you hold the paper over the candles in order to make the invisible writing come out, and then on top of all that, you have to turn the paper over. So it was way too difficult to start off a game. The much better experience to give a player is to find that sweet spot between things that are too hard and too easy. If something is too hard, it's frustrating. If something is too easy, it's boring. And so what you want to do is create this series of challenges that start off easy and then kind of get hard, and the player is struggling with it a little bit, but then he gets over that hump, and then it's kind of easy for a while again, and then it starts to get hard again. And finding that flow through the game is really what a designer's job is all about. In terms of advice that I'd give either to my younger self or to a younger game designer, I'd say one of the most important things is to have other people play your game early and often. You think that you know what you're doing with your game, but it's very difficult to know how other people perceive it. And so getting other people to come in and play and keeping your mouth shut as you watch them play and not prompting them. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's a very valuable thing.